I caught my wife cheating. Then came that fateful Saturday afternoon, a day that began like any other. Melissa and I were driving back from a family gathering. The radio was playing our favorite oldies, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that our life was still that perfect picture I had always clung to. But the calm was abruptly shattered. As we merged onto the highway, Melissa's demeanor shifted. Her eyes darted to her phone, and there was a tension in her jaw I'd never seen before. I asked her casually, "Everything all right?" And she mumbled something about work. I brushed it off. After all, wasn't she always juggling a million things at once? But deep inside, a nagging worry began to fester. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, one where I was the fool too in love to see the truth. The seeds of doubt sprouted rapidly. A few days later, while she was in the shower, I noticed her laptop was open on the coffee table. The screen displayed a half-finished email addressed to someone I didn't recognize, filled with lines that were anything but platonic. My heart pounded as I read phrases like "last night was incredible and can't wait to see you again." I felt a surge of disbelief and betrayal that clashed violently with the deep, unconditional love I'd always professed to feel for her. I was torn. On one hand, I wanted to believe that this was some terrible misunderstanding, a momentary lapse in judgment that had been blown wildly out of proportion. On the other, I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that contradicted everything I thought I knew about our marriage. In that instant, the pristine image of our relationship began to crack. I felt like I was watching my life split into two parallel narratives, one filled with memories of trust and shared laughter, and the other marred by deceit and infidelity. I decided to keep my cool for a little while longer. I wasn't ready to confront her without more evidence, and I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. Every tiny detail started to morph into potential proof: a suspicious text message, a secretive phone call, a sudden change in her schedule. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through old emails and texts, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have no clear picture. It was during these moments of restless anxiety that I began questioning everything. Was I so blinded by love that I'd missed the obvious? Or was it all just a cruel trick of fate? I still remember the gut-wrenching moment I discovered that one final, damning piece of evidence, a series of photographs that left no room for doubt. But I'll save that revelation for the next installment. Right now, I'm still reeling from the initial shock, trying to reconcile the image of the woman I adored with the unfaithful stranger who had been living parallel to me for far too long. The hurt, the betrayal, the overwhelming confusion, it was all too much. I was on the precipice of a truth that would shatter everything I thought our marriage was built upon. It was that fateful day. I was still reeling from the discovery of the damning photos and the half-finished email, but I decided that confronting the issue head-on might be the only way to reclaim some semblance of control. We were headed home from a weekend getaway with a few friends, a rare chance for us to catch up and enjoy some quality time away from the daily grind. Yet, even on this supposedly relaxing drive, the tension was palpable. At first, it was just silence punctuated by the hum of the engine. I sat there, wrestling with my thoughts, wondering how to broach the subject. I was exhausted by the weight of betrayal, and every mile seemed to drag on, each one a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. Melissa, who'd normally be bubbling with life during these trips, was strangely subdued. She fiddled with her phone as if it were her lifeline and avoided meeting my gaze. I knew something was off. I finally broke the silence. "Melissa, we need to talk," I said in a voice that managed to sound both weary and determined. Her reaction was instantaneous, a defensive sharpness that I hadn't seen before. Instead of the compassionate or apologetic look I'd hoped for, she flashed a sneer and muttered, "What now, babe? Always got to make everything a drama, don't you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. "I found those photos on your laptop. I saw the emails, too. I know about the cheating." The words tumbled out, each one heavier than the last. In that moment, every bit of the idealized image I had of our marriage crumbled, revealing a reality I couldn't escape. Her reaction was something I wasn't expecting. She didn't break down or beg for forgiveness. Instead, she scoffed, "Oh please, don't act like you're some saint. I was only exploring other options. You never understood me anyway." Her tone was nonchalant, almost mocking. I felt a surge of anger mixed with utter disbelief. The woman I had given my heart to was now insulting the very essence of our relationship, as if my love was a trivial inconvenience. I pressed on, desperate for some explanation that could ease the sting of betrayal. "Exploring? Melissa, this isn't a fling you can just brush off. It's months of lies, hidden messages, and secret rendezvous. How long has this been going on?" My voice cracked with a mix of hurt and fury. She rolled her eyes and retorted with a hint of venom, "Oh, come on. Don't make it a big deal. It's not like I've been sleeping around with every guy in town. It's just a few mistakes, babe. You're overreacting. The casual dismissal of her actions cut deeper than any harsh word could. It was as if she expected me to simply accept her excuses and move on. But I wasn't that naive anymore. The car ride became a battleground of raw emotion. Every word exchanged was loaded with decades of unspoken resentment and shattered dreams. I remember trying to reach out, pleading for some accountability, while she responded with sarcastic laughter and biting insults. Maybe you should have paid more attention, honey, she snapped when I mentioned how I had been overlooking the signs all these years. Maybe if you weren't so busy being clueless, you'd know what was happening. As the highway blurred past in a nauseating rush, I felt an overwhelming mix of betrayal, sadness, and a seething anger that I couldn't contain. My mind raced with questions. Had I been living in a fantasy all along? How could the woman I adored, the one I trusted implicitly, be so callous about dismantling our shared life? In the midst of this heated exchange, something even more unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a car swerved dangerously close to us, forcing us both to slam on our brakes. The sudden jolt jolted us out of our argument momentarily, and for a split second, our mutual pain was replaced by a visceral, shared adrenaline rush. I looked over, half expecting her to apologize or show any sign of concern for the near accident, but instead, she just glared at me as if I were the one at fault. The incident, as bizarre as it was, only amplified the surreal nature of our situation. It was as if fate had intervened, reminding us that our lives had taken a dangerous, unpredictable turn. The near miss left us both shaken, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and panic, mine with a dawning realization that our marriage had reached a critical, irrevocable point. I recall sitting there afterward, the car parked on the side of the road, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. The argument had left me drained, yet the raw intensity of every word and gesture replayed in my mind like a relentless loop. I was no longer the husband who blindly loved, I was someone who had to confront the harsh truth of betrayal head-on. That day marked the beginning of a journey I never saw coming, a journey through grief, anger, and a deep, soul-crushing sense of loss. I started questioning everything, the vows we had exchanged, the memories we had built, and even the parts of myself that I had sacrificed for our love. Every beat of my heart seemed to echo with the pain of betrayal and the inevitability of change. The days following that fateful car ride felt like I was living in a waking nightmare. I couldn't shake the raw sting of betrayal that clung to every thought, every memory of what our life had once been. I'd gone from being a blissfully devoted husband to someone adrift in a storm of hurt and disbelief, unable to find any anchor in the chaos that Melissa's infidelity had unleashed. I tried to resume my daily routine, thinking that if I kept busy, I might bury the painful emotions beneath a facade of normalcy. But every small detail in our home, every inside joke, every photograph on the wall, was a reminder of the life we'd built together and the lies that now tainted every corner of it. I found myself questioning whether I'd ever truly known her. Was every loving gesture, every whispered promise, all just a cleverly crafted act to lull me into complacency? That afternoon, while I was trying to distract myself with work, my phone buzzed with a text from an old college friend, Mark. He had sensed something was off when I'd been unusually quiet during our recent calls. "Dude, you okay? Heard something about Melissa. Talk to me if you need to vent," he wrote. I hesitated for a moment before replying, pouring out the details of the confrontation, the sneers, and the reckless near accident that seemed almost symbolic of our crumbling reality. Mark's responses were filled with a mix of sympathy and the hard truths that sometimes only a friend can offer. He urged me to take some time for myself, to figure out what I really needed before making any rash decisions. The nights, however, were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying every harsh word she'd thrown at me, every dismissive scoff that made me feel less than human. In those dark hours, anger simmered beneath my skin. I remembered how her nonchalant "just a few mistakes" remark had cut deeper than any betrayal. It wasn't just the physical act of cheating, it was the complete disregard for the sanctity of our marriage, the way she had dismissed our shared dreams and memories as if they meant nothing. Unexpectedly, Melissa's behavior began to spiral even further. She started receiving mysterious phone calls late at night, her demeanor becoming increasingly erratic. One evening, as I returned home earlier than usual from work, I found her in a state of agitated panic, pacing in our living room, her eyes red from crying or perhaps from the strain of keeping her lies straight. When I confronted her, she snapped, "Don't you get it? You're always in the way, always looking for trouble." Her words were as biting as they were unexpected. She wasn't pleading for forgiveness or trying to justify herself. Instead, she was lashing out as if I were the cause of her internal chaos. I couldn't help but wonder, was she in deeper than I thought, tangled in a web of deceit that she could no longer control? Or was this a calculated move to further gaslight me into thinking I was the problem? Her shifting moods and erratic behavior only deepened the mystery. I began noticing oddities: a receipt from a hotel I'd never heard of tucked away in her purse, late-night emails with subjects that hinted at urgent meetings, and even a strange, uncharacteristic mess of clothes in her bedroom. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this wasn't a simple case of a wandering heart, it was a full-blown crisis, one that had taken root in the very foundation of our marriage. The emotional toll was staggering. I oscillated between moments of paralyzing sorrow and bursts of intense anger. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make her feel the same gut-wrenching pain I was enduring. But another, quieter part of me, one that still clung to the remnants of the love I once believed was mutual, yearned for answers. I questioned whether I had ever truly known her, or if I was merely a bystander to her hidden life. Every memory of her laughter, every whispered promise in the dark, now felt like a cruel trick, a delicate mirage that had vanished the moment reality set in. One evening, as I sat alone in our dimly lit living room, I decided to take a long, hard look at everything. I revisited old text messages, reread emails, and even scoured through the photos we'd taken together, each one a painful reminder of a past that now seemed irretrievably lost. I wondered if I was somehow complicit in my own downfall, too blinded by unconditional love to see the red flags waving right in front of me. It was then that I realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be about seeking revenge or even about understanding her actions, it was about reclaiming my own identity from the wreckage of our shattered dreams. In the midst of this internal battle, another twist unfolded. While rifling through some old files on our shared computer, I stumbled upon a folder labeled Plans. Inside, there were documents that detailed trips, investments, and future plans that I had no recollection of discussing with her. It was as if Melissa had been planning a life completely separate from the one we'd been living together. The folder was a silent, damning testament to a secret life, a life where my role was nothing more than an accessory to her ambitions. This discovery, unexpected and chilling, forced me to confront an even harder truth: the woman I had once adored had been building a double life right under my nose. So here I am, standing at a crossroads, trying to piece together the remnants of my broken heart in a future that now seems shrouded in uncertainty. I'm not sure if I can ever fully trust again, or if the memories of what we once shared will forever be tainted by the stain of betrayal. But one thing is certain: I owe it to myself to find clarity in the chaos, to understand how we arrived at this devastating juncture, and to decide whether to fight for the remnants of our past or to walk away and rebuild from the ruins. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for the next set of twists. After that long, sleepless night and the painful discovery of her secret plans folder, I started retracing every step of our recent months. It wasn't just the near-miss accident or the incriminating photos anymore, it was a tapestry of deception that spanned months, maybe even years, and every thread was meticulously woven into a life I never truly knew. One morning, while trying to clear my head with a long walk around our quiet neighborhood, I got a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered, only to hear a distorted voice on the other end saying, "You need to be careful. There are things you don't understand about Melissa." I froze. Who was this? Was it someone from her secret world or just another twisted prank? The voice was low, almost conspiratorial, and it left me with more questions than answers. My heart hammered in my chest, and I wondered if I was even safe in my own home. That night, I decided to comb through every scrap of digital evidence I had managed to gather. I dug deeper into her emails, text messages, and social media profiles. There, buried under layers of casual chatter and meaningless banter, was a series of messages that spoke of clandestine meetings and covert rendezvous at odd hours. Some messages mentioned meeting in locations that I'd never heard her mention before. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was an elaborate, ongoing affair. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. I printed everything out and spread the pages across our dining table, trying to piece together the timeline of her betrayal. As I sat there, flipping through pages of text, photos, and receipts, my mind raced. I remembered the countless times I'd brushed off her secretive behavior with a smile, convincing myself that every couple had their quirks. But now, the facade was gone, replaced by a stark reality: the woman I loved was leading a double life. I felt both numb and enraged, caught in the middle of disbelief and a burning need for answers. Later that evening, after gathering all the evidence I could find, I decided it was time for another confrontation, this time, with every piece of proof in hand. I set up a quiet dinner, hoping that a calm environment might coax her into a confession. As soon as I put the printed documents on the table, her eyes darted nervously around the room. "What's all this?" she snapped, voice laced with irritation and panic. I didn't hold back. "This, Melissa, is the story of how you've been lying to me for months. Emails, texts, hotel receipts, explain that. My voice was steadier than I felt, but every word stung like a cold slap. For a moment, she looked as if she might cry or apologize, but then her demeanor shifted abruptly. With a scoff and a dismissive wave of her hand, she retorted, "You were making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a few harmless flings. Why are you acting like I committed a felony?" Her casual dismissal was maddening. I could see the panic behind her eyes, though, a flash of desperation quickly hidden by her usual bitchy attitude. "Harmless flings? Do you even understand what you're saying?" I shot back. "You betrayed our trust, lied to me day in and day out, and built a life on deception. Every moment we spent together was a lie." At that moment, something else happened that threw everything into further chaos. The doorbell rang, a sound I almost didn't register over the escalating tension. When I opened the door, I found a neighbor I barely knew, holding an envelope. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said awkwardly, "but I found this on my doorstep. It was addressed to you." I took it, heart pounding, and opened it to find a series of bank statements and receipts, documents that confirmed large, unexplained sums of money transferred into accounts I had no idea existed. Melissa's face drained of color when she saw what I held. "That's none of your business," she barked, trying to snatch the envelope from my hand. But I held on, the evidence of her financial secrets clutched tightly in my grip. It turned out that not only was she cheating, but she was also living a double life financially, investing in projects, renting out properties, even paying off someone else's bills. It was as if she'd been planning an escape, building a separate financial world that left our shared life in ruins. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about betrayal on every level. Every lie, every secret meeting, every hidden account was a nail in the coffin of what I thought was our life together. In that moment, the weight of all the evidence pressed down on me, and I realized I was standing at the precipice of a new, brutal reality. Melissa's eyes flashed with anger and fear as she finally said, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." But her words were empty threats, an attempt to regain control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond our control. I spent the rest of the night sitting alone in our living room, the documents scattered before me like fragments of a shattered dream. Every piece of paper was a stark reminder that the love I thought we had was nothing more than an illusion. The emotional toll was immense, a mix of sorrow, betrayal, and a seething anger that left me questioning every moment of our past. I felt as if I was trapped in a nightmare with no escape, forced to confront the reality that the woman I loved had been living a lie all along. If you thought things couldn't get any crazier after that explosive dinner, you'd be dead wrong. The night after I uncovered the financial secrets and laid out all the damning evidence, the situation took an unexpected twist that forced me to face the full spectrum of this betrayal head-on. It started with an eerie knock at our front door in the middle of the night. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not now, after all the chaos, and I almost ignored it. But as the knocking persisted, I reluctantly got up and opened the door, half expecting a desperate messenger or a figure from one of Melissa's secret rendezvous. Instead, I was greeted by a middle-aged man wearing a suit that screamed business professional, a face that looked both confused and determined. "Are you John?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. I nodded, still too stunned to ask what he was doing on my doorstep at such an ungodly hour. "I'm Stephen. I work for a firm that handles estate and financial matters. We were alerted to some irregularities in your joint accounts. I'm here to offer you some clarity, and maybe even some protection." My mind reeled. More evidence of her hidden life? More numbers and documents? Before I could respond, Stephen produced a thick envelope stuffed with legal documents, account statements, and correspondences that seemed to confirm an entire covert network Melissa had been operating. This wasn't just a side affair, it was a full-blown double existence complete with offshore accounts, secret investments, and a ledger of debts that pointed to someone else entirely benefiting from her harmless flings. I slammed the door shut behind him, my pulse racing and thoughts jumbled. Who was this man really? A fixer, a lawyer, or maybe someone working with another partner of hers? The fact that I was receiving these revelations from an official-looking source added a layer of cold, bureaucratic cruelty to an already personal nightmare. I spent the rest of that night poring over Stephen's envelope in a feverish haze, the documents scattered on our dining table like pieces of a monstrous puzzle. Each line of financial data, every signature and transfer record, painted a picture of a life meticulously compartmentalized from ours. Melissa had been running a secret enterprise that went far beyond the mere physical infidelity I'd initially discovered. It was as if she had a separate identity, a double life where I was a mere bystander, unwittingly funding her ambitions. The shock of these findings forced me into an even deeper introspection about who Melissa was and who I thought she was. It wasn't just about the betrayal of our vows, it was the collapse of the entire foundation of our shared dreams and future plans. I felt a cold fury building up inside me, mixed with an overwhelming sense of betrayal that went beyond the realm of romance into the realm of my very identity as her husband. As dawn broke, I was still sitting there, coffee growing cold beside me and the envelope's contents spread out like a damning mosaic. I knew I needed to confront her again, this time, not just as a betrayed husband but as a man determined to reclaim the truth and piece together the shards of our broken life. The raw evidence demanded a reckoning, and I knew it wasn't just about punishing her for the affair, but for deceiving me on multiple levels, emotionally, financially, and in every sense that I had ever believed in our love. The confrontation that day was unlike any before. I waited for Melissa in the living room, trying to steady my breathing and prepare myself for the onslaught of explanations or further denials. When she finally emerged from our bedroom, her face was as unreadable as ever, and there was that familiar glint in her eye, a mix of arrogance and calculated indifference that sent chills down my spine. "Did you enjoy your little treasure hunt last night?" she sneered, as soon as she saw the printed statements and bank documents sprawled on the coffee table. The casual cruelty in her tone was unbearable. "I didn't realize you had become so investigative," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should have left the numbers to the professionals." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the absurdity of it all. "Is that what this is, Melissa? Your professional side hustle?" I fired back, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Not only did you betray me, you also built an entire secret life behind my back. Who are you, really?" Her eyes flickered for a brief moment, a spark of genuine fear before she masked it with her usual bitchy retort. "You always thought you knew me, didn't you?" she retorted sharply. "Maybe you were too busy loving me to notice what I actually needed. I wasn't living for you, John. I was living for me, my ambitions, my plans." Her words, meant to minimize the gravity of her actions, instead struck a devastating blow. I realized that every shared memory, every whispered promise, had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The revelation that she had meticulously managed two entirely separate lives was too much to bear. I felt utterly stripped of the foundation upon which I had built my love and trust. At that moment, the conversation took another bizarre turn. As we were locked in our heated exchange, the doorbell rang once more. This time, it wasn't Stephen, but our neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, standing there with a sympathetic look and a plate of cookies. "I heard voices," she said softly, clearly concerned. "Is everything all right in here?" The absurdity of the moment wasn't lost on me. Even amidst this storm of betrayal, life outside our crisis continued unabated. The intrusion of a kind neighbor, oblivious to the magnitude of my heartbreak, underscored the surreal dissonance between the public facade and the private devastation. I excused myself, telling her to please return later if she had any more questions, and shut the door. Once alone, Melissa's defenses melted into a cold, calculating silence. The conversation dwindled into a void of accusations, just as I felt the final pieces of my shattered illusions fall into place. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, as I sat alone with the stark reality of her double life staring me in the face, I knew there was no turning back. I had seen the depths of her deception, and there was no salvaging the love I once believed in. It was a crossroad, one that demanded a decision about the future of my own identity, my trust, and ultimately, my life. Things only escalated from that fateful night. After the confrontation with Melissa, I spent the next few days in a blur of anger, confusion, and reluctant determination. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about reclaiming control over a life that had been hijacked by secrets and lies. In the immediate aftermath, I found myself forced to face the empty shell of our shared existence. I couldn't go back to my old routines as if nothing had happened. Every corner of our home was haunted by memories of a love that had been nothing but a well-orchestrated illusion. I remember sitting alone in our kitchen, staring blankly at the wall as the realization sank in. Melissa wasn't the woman I thought I married. And if she could construct a double life so meticulously, then who was I to let this continue? Determined to understand the full extent of her deception, I decided to take a closer look at the strange financial transactions and secret documents she'd left scattered behind. I contacted a friend from my college days who worked in finance, a guy named Rick who had an eye for details and a knack for reading between the lines. Over coffee at a nearly deserted diner, I laid out everything: the bank statements, the mysterious transfers, and the ledger that pointed to offshore accounts. Rick's face grew darker with every page I turned. "John, this isn't just a fling gone wrong," he warned, his voice low. "This is a whole other world, a web of financial ties that suggests Melissa was planning her exit strategy long before things got out of hand." That conversation was a turning point. I began to see that I had a choice: wallow in self-pity or fight back. As the days passed, I started setting boundaries. I secured our shared accounts, changed passwords, and even looked into legal advice. I wasn't sure if I wanted to salvage anything from our marriage, but I knew I couldn't allow her to continue undermining my life without a response. Then came another unexpected twist. One evening, while I was methodically sorting through old emails on my computer, I received an anonymous message. The email contained a single sentence: "You are not the only one who's been blind." Attached was a small video clip, grainy and hurriedly recorded, showing Melissa in a compromising situation with someone I hadn't even heard of before. It was like a final nail in the coffin of the illusions I had clung to for so long. The video didn't leave any doubt: her duplicity was not only financial but deeply personal. The shock of that revelation triggered a series of events that forced me to confront the painful reality head-on. I started documenting everything. I kept a journal detailing every suspicious encounter, every late-night phone call, and every odd piece of evidence I uncovered. My nights were now spent in front of my laptop, cross-referencing dates and conversations, trying to assemble the jigsaw puzzle of her hidden life. With each piece I put together, the betrayal became clearer and more painful, but it also began to empower me. One of the most surreal moments came when Melissa's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began receiving unexpected visits from strangers at odd hours. I caught her in the act of hastily deleting messages on her phone when a man in a dark suit lingered at our doorstep for just a minute longer than seemed normal. It was as if every day brought a new twist in a story that I never signed up for. I felt like I was trapped in a real-life thriller, where the stakes weren't just emotional, they were personal, financial, and psychological. At the same time, I had to deal with the judgmental stares and whispered gossip from neighbors and friends. The ripple effects of her actions spread wider than I ever imagined, and I found myself at the center of a drama that was public as much as it was personal. Yet, amidst the chaos, I began to see a glimmer of clarity. I wasn't the helpless victim anymore. I was the one holding the evidence, the one who had taken back some control of my life. In a twist that I never anticipated, Melissa reached out to me one afternoon with a smug invitation to talk, seemingly contrite, yet dripping with the same air of superiority that had always infuriated me. I agreed to meet at a quiet park, determined to get some answers once and for all. When we sat across from each other on a weathered bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, the calm of the setting sun contrasted sharply with the storm raging between us. "I see you've been busy," she said coolly, a sarcastic smile tugging at her lips as she glanced at my notebook filled with her secrets. "Planning your revenge, or just trying to make sense of all this chaos?" Her tone was mocking, as if she thought the whole ordeal was nothing more than a petty drama. I looked her in the eyes, trying to summon the strength I had been gathering over the past few days. "This isn't about revenge, Melissa," I replied steadily. "It's about truth. About knowing who we really are when all the masks come off." My words, though measured, carried the weight of months of pain and determination. She scoffed, dismissing my words with a wave of her hand. "Truth? There's no truth here, only what you choose to believe." I did what I had to do. But even as she spoke, I saw a flicker of something: fear, regret, or maybe just the realization that her carefully constructed world was crumbling in front of her. That conversation in the park was a turning point. I walked away feeling a mix of sorrow and empowerment. I knew that whatever the future held, I had already taken the first step towards reclaiming my life. Melissa's web of lies was vast, but every lie unraveled was a step towards freedom. It wasn't long after that park conversation that I found myself caught up in a whirlwind of unexpected encounters, ones that would shape the next phase of this twisted saga. I wasn't prepared for just how deep the rabbit hole went, or for the surprising allies I'd meet along the way. A couple of days after that fateful park meeting, I received a message on a new, anonymous email account I'd set up for my research. The subject line simply read, "You are not alone." I hesitated, then opened it to find a carefully typed message. "I know what you're going through. I've been where you are. Trust me, there's a way out of this maze of deceit. Meet me tomorrow at the old coffee shop on 5th. I have information that might help." I couldn't decide if it was a cruel prank or a genuine offer of help, but curiosity, and a desperate need for clarity, drove me to show up. The next morning, the coffee shop was nearly empty, the kind of place where secrets felt safe in the shadows. I sat at a corner table, nervously stirring my coffee, when a woman in her early 40s slid into the seat across from me without so much as an apology for the sudden intrusion. "Call me Renee," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for tails. "I've been tracking Melissa's financial trails for a while now. Let's just say I wasn't as blind as you once were." At first, I was wary. How could I trust a stranger in all this? But her calm confidence and the way she laid out a neatly organized folder filled with documents and annotated maps of financial transactions slowly eased my suspicions. Renee, it turned out, was a former investigative accountant who'd stumbled upon one of Melissa's offshore accounts through her own work, and once she dug a little deeper, she couldn't help but get involved. Her dossier on Melissa was impressively detailed, pointing not only to the secret investments I'd uncovered but also linking her to a network of people who'd profited from her double dealing. Melissa wasn't just cheating on you, she was orchestrating something far bigger, Renee confided, her voice a mix of sympathy and steel. I've seen enough to know that she's been funneling money into accounts for someone else entirely. And it's not just about escaping our life, it looks like she was planning something that goes beyond just a messy divorce. As we pored over the files together, a couple of other unexpected characters began to emerge from the shadows of my unraveling life. There was Dan, an old colleague who'd once joked about my obliviousness when it came to the finer details of our marriage. He now turned out to be a tech whiz who'd hacked into Melissa's encrypted emails at my request. Dan showed me a series of messages from someone named Victor, filled with references to deliveries and settlements that hinted at a criminal enterprise. The more I saw, the clearer it became. Melissa's infidelity wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was interwoven with a web of financial crimes and illicit dealings. In one surreal meeting, I even found myself in a dimly lit back room of a local bar, where Dan introduced me to an ex-detective named Carla. Carla had been tracking a similar case for years and believed that Melissa's network might be connected to a larger scam involving real estate fraud and money laundering. This isn't just about a cheating spouse, she warned in a hushed tone as we sat around a scarred wooden table. It's a full-blown operation, and you've been caught in the middle of it. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. With every new ally I encountered, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, revealing that Melissa had been leading a double, or maybe even triple, life. Her charm, her cunning, and her ruthlessness were no longer confined to our marriage. They were the tools of a broader game, and I was just one of the pawns she'd manipulated. Yet, as odd as it sounded, I began to feel a strange sense of solidarity with these unexpected friends. In the midst of betrayal and heartbreak, here were people who genuinely cared about exposing the truth. Together, we started mapping out her financial trails, analyzing suspicious transactions, and compiling evidence that painted a damning picture of her criminal endeavors. It was during one of these late-night strategy sessions, as rain pattered against the window of an abandoned warehouse we'd turned into our temporary war room, that I realized I wasn't the helpless victim I'd once been. With Renee's expertise, Dan's technical wizardry, and Carla's investigative insight, I felt a surge of determination. We were no longer just gathering evidence, we were building a case that might not only free me from Melissa's web of lies but also bring her sinister network into the light. I won't lie, the journey was as frightening as it was exhilarating. Every call from an unknown number, every shadowed figure in the night, reminded me that the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone. I had allies, and together, we were on a collision course with a truth that could change everything.